Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little less academic and a lot more familiar, the ancient art of family dysfunction. You might say, my family argues too, but trust me, when your disagreement could end with someone being disowned or accidentally poisoned at dinner, things get a bit more complicated. Forget modern passive-aggressive text messages and awkward holiday silences. One wrong word could get you excommunicated. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's tempting to imagine medieval families as tight-knit units bound together by necessity, shared hardship, and the comforting glow of the family hearth. Picture them gathered around rough wooden tables, sharing simple meals and simple affections, united against the harsh realities of plague, war, and feudalism. But under all that togetherness and mutual dependence, there were people, regular, flawed, irritable people, who occasionally looked at their relatives across the dinner table and thought, I wonder if anyone would notice if Brother Edmund accidentally fell into the moat, or if Sister Margaret's dowry negotiations mysteriously collapsed right before the wedding. And to be fair, who could blame them? There was no privacy, no personal space, no weekend getaways to cool off after an argument, no therapy, no self-help books, and definitely no opportunity to move across the country and start fresh. When you disagreed with your family, you still had to share the same cramped living space, eat from the same pot, work the same land, and pretend to get along during morning prayers while secretly planning revenge that wouldn't technically violate canon law. If someone told you there was a way to resolve family conflicts that didn't involve living in the same room as the person who borrowed your best cloak without asking, stole your inheritance, or arranged your marriage to someone who smelled like rotting turnips, you'd probably try it too. Even if it involved complex legal proceedings, church intervention, or occasionally creative interpretations of accidental death. Contrary to modern assumptions, the concept of family harmony wasn't some sacred medieval ideal that everyone naturally achieved through mutual respect and Christian charity. Family arguments were baked right into the culture, embedded in legal systems, and often encouraged by social structures that viewed conflict as a natural part of maintaining proper hierarchies. But they weren't called family drama, or toxic relationships, or dysfunctional dynamics. They were wrapped in terms like family honor, proper discipline, maintaining household order, preserving bloodline integrity, or in extreme cases, teaching someone their proper place in the natural hierarchy of creation as ordained by God and confirmed by secular authority. Medieval family arguments weren't just personal disagreements between people who happened to be related. They were theological, legal, social, economic, and political events that could affect everyone from the local priest to the village blacksmith to the king himself. Because when your family unit was also your economic unit, your social unit, your military unit, and often your primary source of political identity, a good old-fashioned family fight could disrupt way more than just Sunday dinner. In the medieval world, you didn't need a therapist or a family counselor to mediate your disputes. All you needed was a patriarch with absolute authority backed by divine sanction, a clear understanding of who owed obedience to whom based on complex hierarchies of age, gender, and birth order, and a vague disregard for the emotional well-being of anyone who ranked below you in the family pecking order. Because in those days, the family was the dealer, and they weren't always gentle about enforcing the house rules. Medieval Europe was overflowing with families who had turned passive-aggressive manipulation, economic coercion, and social ostracism into art forms that could either preserve family unity or destroy someone's inheritance prospects, marriage opportunities, and social standing forever. The line between maintaining proper family discipline and making someone's life miserable until they submitted completely to your will was, let's say, artistically interpreted by people who had strong opinions about divine order and natural hierarchy. Fathers, mothers, eldest sons, family elders, and various relatives all dabbled in household politics with varying levels of training, legal authority, and enthusiastic commitment to making their point. If you wanted something to knock down someone's pride, establish your authority over rebellious family members, or make the younger generation remember who was really in charge of family resources, they had options. Lots of options. Take primogeniture, for example. This inheritance system was like nature's version of Russian roulette, but with more legal documentation and longer-lasting resentment. Properly applied, it ensured family wealth stayed concentrated in the hands of the eldest son, and estates remained intact across generations. Improperly applied, it introduced you to an entirely new set of problems, like younger sons with no inheritance prospects and a strong desire to prove they deserved more than the family was willing to give them, often through methods that tested everyone's commitment to family unity. Or entailment, the legal practice that tied up family property for generations, preventing anyone from selling, dividing, or substantially altering inherited lands. Legend said it protected family wealth from reckless heirs and kept estates in proper hands for posterity. That didn't stop families from arguing about it anyway, usually by involving lawyers, church authorities, royal courts, and occasionally armed conflict in disputes that could last longer than the average peasant's lifespan. Then there was arranged marriage, also known as the ultimate family negotiation tool, which is exactly the kind of system that screams, maybe there's a better way to handle romantic relationships than treating them like livestock trading agreements. It was used to create alliances, settle debts, advance political ambitions, and on occasion, get rid of difficult family members whose personalities didn't quite fit the family's social aspirations. Medieval family planning was a bold business that treated love as a luxury that could interfere with proper strategic thinking. These disputes were often combined into complex feuds, bitter inheritances, multi-generational legal battles, and those famous family wars that could divide entire regions into competing factions. And they weren't always initiated voluntarily. Sometimes they were imposed during family meetings, legal proceedings, religious ceremonies, or by a well-meaning patriarch who thought a little extra pressure couldn't hurt anyone's character development. But hurt it could, and frequently did, in ways that would make modern family counselors reach for their strongest medications. Primogeniture. The medieval equivalent of winner takes all, but with more Latin terminology, legal documentation, and a much higher chance of creating lifelong resentment among siblings who had to smile and pretend they were grateful for the system that guaranteed their economic dependence on their older brother's goodwill. Known to legal scholars as the inheritance system that kept estates intact and prevented the endless subdivision of family lands, and to everyone else as the reason Uncle Robert still won't speak to his brothers 40 years after grandfather's funeral, and why family gatherings require careful seating arrangements to prevent actual violence. Primogeniture wasn't just a legal concept designed by practical administrators. It was a family dynamics nightmare engineered by people who apparently believed that sibling rivalry was insufficiently dramatic, without the added pressure of knowing that one child would inherit everything, while the others would inherit nothing except the opportunity to demonstrate their gratitude for whatever scraps the eldest son chose to provide. Used across medieval Europe for centuries, primogeniture wasn't just about property distribution or maintaining family wealth, it was about power, prestige, social standing, political influence, and the profound psychological impact of being told from birth that your eldest brother mattered more than you ever would, no matter how intelligent, talented, hardworking, or morally superior you might prove to be. So what exactly did primogeniture do to families? Well, that depends on your perspective and your birth order. In theory, it prevented the endless subdivision of family lands that could reduce a great estate to scattered patches too small to support anyone adequately. It was the medieval version of don't break up the family business, combined with make sure someone has enough resources to maintain proper social standing. But in practice, it could create hierarchy, resentment, economic dependence, psychological pressure, and family dynamics that would make modern psychologists reach for their strongest coffee and their most sophisticated therapeutic interventions, while wondering how medieval families managed to function at all. The eldest son, the heir, got everything that mattered: the land, the title, the family castle, the political connections, the social standing, the economic resources, and most importantly, the authority that came with being head of the household after his father's death. he became the person who controlled everyone else's economic future, marriage prospects, and social opportunities. Younger sons they got to hope their older brother was generous, patient, understanding, and committed to family welfare rather than personal advancement, or that the church had openings for younger sons who could demonstrate sufficient piety to overcome their obvious disappointment about their economic prospects, or that some distant relative needed military service in exchange for room, board, and the chance to prove their worth in ways that didn't involve inheriting anything substantial. It contains legal precedents, social expectation, religious sanction, and psychological pressure, which interfere with natural family relationships in ways that made medieval homes interesting places to live if you enjoyed complex emotional dynamics and didn't mind occasional threats of disinheritance during dinner conversations. To put it non-academically, your medieval family psychology got weird fast and stayed weird for decades. Eldest sons suddenly found themselves with enormous responsibility, social pressure, economic burdens, and the uncomfortable knowledge that their siblings' futures depended entirely on their generosity, wisdom, and continued good health. They had to balance family loyalty against personal interests while managing estates, maintaining political relationships, and somehow finding time to produce male heirs who could continue the family line without disappointing anyone's expectations. Younger sons had to navigate the delicate balance between showing proper respect for their older brother's authority and harboring secret resentment about a system that guaranteed their subordinate status, regardless of their personal qualities or achievements. They could demonstrate loyalty through military service, religious devotion, or helpful administration of family properties, but they remained essentially dependent on someone else's goodwill for their entire lives. Daughters were generally expected to marry well and become someone else's family's responsibility, preferably someone with enough resources to provide appropriate dowries that wouldn't bankrupt the family estate. Their role in primogeniture was mainly to avoid causing problems that might interfere with the smooth transfer of property from father to eldest son. Primogeniture was often the direct cause of conflicts that could split families for generations, creating divisions that affected not just immediate siblings, but their children, grandchildren, and descendants who inherited both family resources and family resentments. Brothers who had grown up together, shared the same teachers, played the same games, learned the same skills, suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of an enormous wealth gap that no amount of personal affection could bridge. Some families handled this gracefully through careful planning, generous provision for younger children, and emphasis on family unity over individual advancement. Others didn't, creating household atmospheres where every conversation carried undertones of economic anxiety, social resentment, and barely suppressed anger about systems that seemed designed to reward birth order rather than personal merit. Now, was it legal? Absolutely. Controlled inheritance systems weren't just permitted by medieval legal authorities. They were encouraged by church and secular officials who valued social stability, economic concentration, and predictable succession over fairness, individual opportunity, or family harmony. The system had divine sanction, legal precedent, and practical advantages that outweighed its obvious psychological costs. But it was controversial, especially among the younger sons and daughters who found themselves shut out of family wealth, despite being equally related to the deceased patriarch and often equally capable of managing family resources responsibly. Some challenged primogeniture through legal proceedings, others through political maneuvering, still others through military action that treated inheritance disputes as legitimate causes for armed conflict. Still, primogeniture had passionate defenders among legal scholars, practical administrators, church authorities, and people with nothing to lose who appreciated systems that prevented family estates from being subdivided into economically unviable fragments. It even made its way into marriage negotiations, where families would evaluate potential matches based partly on inheritance prospects and partly on the likelihood that a particular bloodline would maintain its wealth and social standing across multiple generations. But the psychological costs were enormous, creating family environments where love had to compete with economics, where personal relationships were subordinated to property considerations, and where sibling affection was constantly tested by systems that guaranteed unequal treatment based on arbitrary factors like birth order and gender. Few legal systems in the medieval world were as capable of creating long-term family conflict as entailment, a practice so effective at generating multi-generational disputes that it sparked heated debates among legal scholars, frustrated heirs, occasionally patient saints who had to mediate the resulting conflicts, and family members who found themselves legally unable to access their own inherited property. Legally known as fee-tail, entailment was associated with property preservation, inheritance control, and a high probability of creating family arguments that could last longer than most dynasties, outliving the original property owners by decades, while continuing to influence family relationships through complex legal restrictions that nobody fully understood. Medieval legal experts believed that entailment was an essential tool for preserving family wealth, ensuring that estates remained intact across generations and preventing irresponsible heirs from selling off family lands to pay gambling debts, fund expensive military campaigns, or support lifestyle choices that demonstrated insufficient commitment to family honor and social responsibility. It was a sophisticated system for preventing prodigal sons from destroying family fortunes, protecting family property from creditors and political enemies, and ensuring that each generation would have adequate resources to maintain appropriate social standing without risking the economic foundation that supported extended family welfare. But here's the catch that created most of the family conflicts. Entailment created a legal system where each generation was essentially the caretaker of property they could never truly own, control, or modify according to their own judgment about what would best serve family interests in their particular historical circumstances. You might live in the family castle, collect rent from family tenants, style yourself as lord of the manor, and exercise day-to-day authority over family properties, but you couldn't make fundamental changes to the estate, sell portions to raise capital for investments, or divide property among children according to their individual needs and capabilities without violating legal terms set by long-dead relatives who couldn't have anticipated current circumstances. This led to conflicts that were both immediate and eternal, affecting not just current family members but future generations who would inherit both family property and family legal restrictions. Heirs who wanted to modernize their properties, adapt to changing economic conditions, pay off accumulated debts, or make strategic investments found themselves legally prevented from accessing their own wealth in ways that could improve family welfare. Younger siblings who might have preferred cash settlements instead of ongoing dependence on family goodwill discovered they had no legal recourse when the estate was tied up in perpetuity according to terms that prioritized property preservation over individual opportunity or family flexibility. The enforcement process itself was legally complex, politically charged, and spiritually fraught, involving multiple levels of authority who often had conflicting interpretations of entailment law. Church courts, royal courts, manor courts, and local legal authorities all had different standards for what constituted valid entailment, legitimate modification of entailed property, and appropriate penalties for violations of inheritance restrictions. Some priests viewed entailment as a holy preservation of family unity and social stability that reflected divine order and natural hierarchy. Others saw it as an impediment to charitable giving that could endanger souls by preventing proper deathbed bequests to religious institutions that needed financial support for their spiritual missions. Appeals processes existed but were designed to discourage their use through expensive procedures, lengthy delays, and legal standards that favored existing arrangements over proposed changes. Challenge an entailment, and you were questioning the judgment of deceased family members who were presumably wiser than current generations and more committed to long-term family welfare than immediate gratification. Win your challenge, and you were breaking faith with family tradition, undermining social stability, and potentially creating precedents that would encourage other families to abandon time-tested systems for preserving wealth and maintaining proper social relationships. Time limits were arbitrary, often contradictory, and frequently secret until after they had expired, creating legal situations where families discovered they had missed crucial deadlines for challenging entailments or modifying inheritance terms. Submit legal challenges late, and you faced penalties that might include forfeiture of any claim to family property, fines that could bankrupt individual family members, or social ostracism that made future legal action impossible. Ask about deadlines, and you were treated as a troublemaker who didn't trust family legal traditions or respect the wisdom of arrangements that had served previous generations adequately. Even successful navigation of entailment law didn't guarantee family harmony or economic prosperity. Property that couldn't be sold could become a financial burden during economic downturns, political upheavals, or natural disasters that required flexible responses to changing circumstances. Estates that couldn't be divided could force family members into uncomfortable proximity for their entire lives, creating household tensions that were exacerbated by legal restrictions that prevented anyone from establishing independent economic foundations. Legal restrictions that prevented charitable donations could put families in conflict with religious authorities who expected generous support for church activities, creating spiritual dilemmas where family legal obligations conflicted with religious duties and social expectations. Documentation requirements were extensive, constantly changing, and often contradictory, requiring families to maintain legal records that proved compliance with entailment terms while navigating bureaucratic systems that seemed designed to create confusion rather than clarity. Different authorities required different types of documentation, written in different languages, using different legal terminology, and stored in different locations that might be geographically inaccessible during times of political conflict or natural disaster. So you approached the imposing structures of medieval family law, clutching documents you couldn't modify, bound by decisions made by ancestors you'd never met, hoping to maintain property that you could never truly control while managing family relationships that were constrained by legal systems that prioritized property preservation over individual happiness or family harmony. Welcome to entailment, where the legal system was sophisticated, the intentions were noble, the procedures were complex, and every inheritance could turn into a multi-generational family civil war that tested everyone's commitment to both legal compliance and family unity. You've somehow navigated inheritance law and property entailment without being disinherited, legally challenged, or driven insane by bureaucratic procedures. Remarkable. Now comes perhaps the most psychologically challenging part of any medieval family dispute: marriage negotiations, where your personal preferences matter less than livestock trading, political alliance building, and economic calculation, and where the wrong romantic attachment could destroy your family's political standing, social reputation, and economic prospects for generations. Medieval marriage wasn't about love, personal compatibility, or individual happiness. It was about alliance, economics, social advancement, political strategy, and the cold calculation of which family connections would best serve your clan's long-term interests in an increasingly complex world of competing loyalties, shifting political circumstances, and economic uncertainties that could transform allies into enemies overnight. Your marriage was essentially a business merger that happened to involve sharing a bed with someone your parents chose based on their dowry size, their family's military connections, their political reliability, their social standing, their religious orthodoxy, and their likelihood of producing male heirs who wouldn't embarrass the family name through incompetence, scandal, or unfortunate personality traits. Let's say you're a younger son in a minor noble family, because that gives you a chance to experience the full nightmare of medieval romance, where personal desires are subordinated to family strategy and individual happiness is considered a luxury that interferes with proper decision-making. Your older brother inherited the family lands, which means your marriage prospects depend entirely on your ability to attract someone whose family has more money than sense, more political connections than existing obligations, or whose strategic needs align with your family's broader ambitions in ways that create mutual advantage rather than competitive conflict. Your marriage negotiations are conducted by your parents, who consider your personal preferences about as relevant as your opinion on international trade policy, military strategy, or theological disputes. They're evaluating potential matches based on dowry size, family reputation, territorial holdings, military alliances, political reliability, religious orthodoxy, and the prospective bride's likelihood of surviving childbirth long enough to produce several sons while managing household affairs competently. But here's where it gets socially complex and politically dangerous. Every marriage negotiation is also a potential source of family conflict that could escalate into legal disputes, social warfare, economic competition, or actual violence between families who discover that their interests are fundamentally incompatible despite initial appearances of mutual advantage. Reject a marriage proposal, and you're not just declining a romantic opportunity. You're insulting another family's honor, questioning their social standing, implying that their daughter isn't good enough for your family, and potentially creating enemies who will remember the slight when future opportunities for cooperation or conflict arise. Accept the wrong proposal, and you're committing your family to alliances that might be politically disastrous, economically burdensome, or socially embarrassing when the other family's true character, financial situation, or political commitments become apparent after the wedding ceremonies are completed and legal obligations become irreversible. Your parents' marriage strategy for you might conflict with your siblings' marriage needs, creating internal family competition for the best available matches in a limited social pool where eligible families are also evaluating multiple marriage proposals simultaneously while pursuing their own strategic objectives. Your sister might need to marry into a family with military connections that could provide protection during political conflicts. Your brother might need to marry someone with commercial assets that could diversify family economic interests. But there are only so many suitable families in your social circle, and they're all evaluating multiple marriage proposals while pursuing their own complex strategies for advancement. Religious authorities add another layer of complexity, legal restriction, and potential conflict to every marriage negotiation. The church has its own rules about acceptable marriages. No marrying within several degrees of kinship, no marrying during certain seasons of the religious calendar, no marrying without proper church approval, and adequate financial arrangements for supporting church activities. Violate these rules, and your marriage could be declared invalid years after the ceremony. Your children could be considered illegitimate with no inheritance rights, and your family's inheritance claims could be disputed for generations by relatives who challenge the legal validity of marriages that produced competing heirs. Foreign marriage alliances offer higher political stakes, greater potential advantages, but exponentially higher risks that could destroy your family if international political circumstances change in ways that transform friendly foreign relatives into dangerous enemies with intimate knowledge of your family's vulnerabilities, resources, and strategic weaknesses. Marry your daughter to a foreign noble, and you're creating diplomatic connections that could enhance your family's international standing, provide access to foreign markets, and offer protection during domestic political conflicts. But you're also creating vulnerabilities where foreign political developments could suddenly make your son-in-law an enemy of your own king, forcing your family to choose between family loyalty and political survival. The negotiation process itself is a complex diplomatic dance where every gesture is analyzed for hidden meanings, every offer is evaluated for unstated implications, and every response is interpreted as evidence of family character, strategic thinking, and commitment to alliance obligations that extend far beyond the immediate marriage arrangement. Offer too large a dowry, and you appear desperate to make the match, financially irresponsible, or insufficiently confident in your family's natural attractiveness as alliance partners. Offer too small a dowry, and you insult the prospective groom's family, suggest that you don't value the alliance sufficiently, or imply that their social standing doesn't merit generous treatment. The wrong gift exchange during negotiations could start feuds that last longer than the marriage you're trying to arrange, creating permanent enemies out of families who might otherwise have been valuable allies, or at least neutral neighbors, in an increasingly complex political landscape. Economic factors make every marriage negotiation a high-stakes gamble where financial calculations must account for unpredictable variables that could transform profitable alliances into economic disasters within years of the wedding ceremony. Property values fluctuate based on military campaigns you can't predict, political developments you can't control, and economic conditions that depend on everything from weather patterns to international trade relationships that could change overnight. Family fortunes rise and fall based on royal favor that could change with new monarchs, political scandals, or shifts in international alliances that make yesterday's trusted allies into today's dangerous enemies. Political alliances shift based on international developments that might not reach your region for months after they've occurred, creating situations where marriage arrangements that seemed strategically brilliant become politically suicidal when new information finally arrives. Even successful marriage negotiations don't guarantee family harmony, political advantage, or economic prosperity. Marriages that looked politically advantageous during negotiations might become liabilities if political circumstances change, economic conditions deteriorate, or the other family's true character becomes apparent only after legal obligations are established and difficult to modify. Spouses who seemed suitable during courtship might develop personality conflicts, political disagreements, or religious differences that create ongoing family tension, undermine alliance effectiveness, and potentially escalate into conflicts that divide extended family networks into competing factions. Children from arranged marriages might inherit conflicting loyalties, competing obligations, and incompatible expectations that divide their descendants for generations, while creating inheritance disputes that test family unity and political stability. Contract enforcement depends on which legal authority has jurisdiction over marriage disputes, and jurisdiction is determined by complex rules that change based on the social rank of the families involved, the location of the property being exchanged, the religious affiliation of the contracting parties, and political relationships that might shift during the course of marriage negotiations. Each legal system, church courts, royal courts, manor courts, urban courts, has different rules, different procedures, different standards for what constitutes a valid marriage agreement, and different penalties for violations of marriage contracts that might not become apparent until disputes arise years or decades after the original ceremonies. Appeals processes exist but are expensive, time-consuming, politically risky, and designed to discourage their use by families who might prefer to resolve marriage disputes through negotiation rather than legal proceedings that could damage reputations, expose family secrets, and create new enemies while failing to resolve underlying problems. So you navigate medieval marriage negotiations like a diplomat walking through a minefield, constantly calculating the relative advantages of different potential matches while ensuring that your family's behavior reflects appropriate respect for marriage partners whose exact value to your family's long-term interests you probably don't fully understand and won't be able to evaluate until years after irreversible commitments have been made. Welcome to medieval romance, where love was optional, strategy was everything, political calculation was essential, economic considerations were paramount, and one wrong engagement could destroy your family's prospects for generations while creating enemies who would remember your mistakes long after you'd forgotten the reasoning behind your decisions. By midday, you've survived inheritance disputes, property law complications, and marriage negotiations without being disinherited, legally challenged, or betrothed to someone whose family considers you an inadequate match for their social aspirations. Impressive. Now comes the part of your medieval family experience that sounds manageable but is actually a refined form of psychological torture. Daily household management, where every domestic decision becomes a power struggle, every routine activity becomes a test of family hierarchy, and where the wrong approach to running your family could trigger conflicts that make political wars look straightforward and emotionally uncomplicated. Your medieval household isn't the private nuclear family unit that modern people imagine when they think about family life. It's an economic enterprise, a political institution, a religious community, and a social organization that includes your immediate family, extended relatives, servants, apprentices, religious dependents, and probably some hangers-on whose exact relationship to your family is diplomatically vague but politically necessary. Managing this household requires the administrative skills of a business executive, the diplomatic talents of an international ambassador, the military leadership capabilities of a field commander, and the psychological insight of a trained therapist, usually simultaneously while maintaining the appearance of effortless competence that demonstrates your fitness for family leadership. Let's start with the family hierarchy, which is theoretically clear according to religious teaching and legal precedent, but practically complicated by personal relationships, competing obligations, financial dependencies, political alliances, and medieval legal traditions that sometimes contradict each other in ways that create impossible situations where following one authority means violating another. Your father is supposedly the absolute head of household with unquestioned authority over all family members, property, and decisions. But his practical authority might be limited by his wife's family connections that provide essential political protection, his eldest son's military service obligations that create conflicting loyalties, his mother-in-law's control over specific family assets that she refuses to transfer completely, or his own dependence on extended family support that requires diplomatic management of relationships he can't control unilaterally. Your daily schedule isn't controlled by personal preference, individual convenience, or rational efficiency. It's determined by religious obligations that require family participation, seasonal agricultural demands that affect everyone's responsibilities, family traditions that must be maintained to preserve social standing, and political necessities that might require sudden changes in routine to accommodate visiting dignitaries, military obligations, or crisis management. Morning prayers aren't optional spiritual reflection where individuals connect with divine authority according to personal inclination. They're mandatory family meetings where attendance is monitored, participation is evaluated, and absence is interpreted as evidence of religious doubt, family disloyalty, or dangerous independence that threatens household unity and social stability. Meal planning becomes a complex negotiation involving religious dietary restrictions that change with the liturgical calendar, seasonal food availability that depends on agricultural success and trade relationships, family status requirements that demand appropriate demonstration of wealth and social standing, and the practical challenge of feeding 15 to 20 people from whatever the kitchen staff managed to acquire, preserve, and prepare with medieval cooking technology. Serve food that's too simple, and you're failing to maintain proper family dignity, suggesting economic problems that could damage political relationships, or demonstrating insufficient appreciation for God's bounty and family social obligations. Serve food that's too elaborate, and you're wasting resources that might be needed for more important family expenses like military equipment, political gifts, religious donations, or emergency reserves that could prove essential during economic downturns or political crises. But here's where daily life gets psychologically dangerous and politically complex. Every household decision becomes an opportunity for family members to challenge established authority, assert their own importance within family hierarchy, advance personal agendas that might conflict with overall family welfare, or test the limits of their influence over family policy and resource allocation. Your sister wants family resources allocated to her upcoming marriage negotiations, which could enhance family political connections, but might also strain family finances and create obligations that interfere with other family strategic objectives. Your younger brother thinks the family should invest more in his military training and equipment, which could improve family military capabilities and social standing, but might also divert resources from agricultural improvements, commercial opportunities, or religious obligations that could provide different kinds of long-term benefits. Your mother believes the household needs to spend more on religious charitable activities, which could enhance family spiritual welfare and social reputation, but might also reduce resources available for economic investment, political activities, or practical improvements that could strengthen family material foundations. Religious observance adds another layer of potential conflict, theological complexity, and social pressure to every family interaction and household decision. How much time should be spent in private prayer versus productive labor that supports family economic welfare? Which saints' days require special observance that disrupts normal household routines and reduces economic productivity? How much family income should be dedicated to church donations, religious charitable activities, and spiritual obligations versus practical family needs like property maintenance, political gifts, and emergency reserves? These aren't abstract theological questions that can be resolved through scholarly debate. They're daily decisions that affect everyone's quality of life, economic security, and social standing while requiring theological knowledge, political wisdom, and practical judgment that most family members don't possess but are expected to demonstrate. Managing servants and apprentices requires diplomatic skills, psychological insight, and security awareness that medieval families rarely possessed but desperately needed to maintain household stability and protect family interests from internal threats that could be more dangerous than external enemies. Your household staff knows intimate details about your family's finances, personal relationships, private conflicts, political strategies, and security vulnerabilities. They're essential to daily operations, but also potential sources of gossip that could damage family reputation, theft that could undermine family economic stability, or espionage that could provide valuable intelligence to rival families who might use such information for competitive advantage. Trust them too much, and they might exploit your family's vulnerabilities for personal gain, political advancement, or financial reward from enemies who value information about your family's weaknesses more than you value their continued service. Trust them too little, and they might seek employment with families who offer better working conditions, higher wages, more respectful treatment, or greater opportunities for advancement, leaving you without essential household support, while potentially providing competitors with experienced staff who understand your family's operations intimately. Educational decisions become family political issues when different family members have different ideas about which children should receive what kind of training, how much family resources should be invested in education versus other family needs, and whether educational opportunities should focus on practical skills that serve immediate family interests or broader learning that might create opportunities for individual advancement that doesn't necessarily benefit overall family welfare. Should your younger son be educated for church service that could provide family political connections and spiritual benefits, but might also remove him from family economic activities and create divided loyalties between family and religious authority? Should he receive military training that could enhance family martial capabilities and social standing, but might also expose him to dangers that could reduce family human resources and create obligations to military commanders who might have interests that conflict with family priorities? Should he learn commercial skills that could diversify family economic activities and provide new sources of income, but might also expose family assets to commercial risks and create relationships with merchant families whose social standing might be considered inappropriate for your family's political aspirations? How much family resources should be invested in your daughter's education when she'll eventually marry into another family and her advanced education might actually make her less suitable for traditional marriage arrangements that prioritize domestic skills over intellectual development? These decisions affect not just individual children, but the family's long-term political strategies, economic development, and social positioning in ways that require planning across decades while accounting for political and economic changes that can't be predicted accurately. Economic management is constantly complicated by the fact that medieval family finances are intimately connected to everything from local agricultural cycles to international trade conditions, from royal political decisions to church policy changes, from weather patterns to military campaigns, none of which individual families can control, but all of which directly affect family economic welfare. Your family's income depends on land rents that fluctuate based on harvest quality, agricultural productivity, and tenant economic stability. Commercial activities that depend on political stability, trade route security, and market conditions that could change overnight. Investments in other families' enterprises that might succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically based on factors that have nothing to do with the original business plan. Seasonal changes affect everything from food availability and household heating costs to the amount of work required to maintain your family's physical infrastructure, the availability of labor for essential projects, and the travel conditions that determine your ability to maintain political relationships, conduct commercial activities, and manage extended family obligations. Winter means higher heating costs that strain family budgets, limited fresh food that affects household nutrition and health, and family members spending more time in close proximity without outdoor activities to reduce social tension and provide opportunities for privacy that could help manage interpersonal conflicts. Summer means agricultural work that requires all available labor, but also provides opportunities for travel, trade, political diplomacy, and social activities that can enhance family political connections while creating expenses that must be balanced against agricultural income that depends on weather conditions and market prices. Even sleeping arrangements become sources of family conflict when space is limited. Privacy is nearly non-existent, and personal relationships are constantly influenced by physical proximity that affects everything from personal conversations to romantic opportunities to the spread of contagious diseases that could devastate entire households. Who shares which rooms affects everything from personal relationships and individual privacy to political alliances within the household, and your ability to maintain confidential communications that might be essential for family security or competitive advantage. Your sleeping proximity to other family members influences your access to private conversations that might affect family policy, your involvement in family decision-making processes that determine resource allocation and strategic planning, and your ability to maintain personal relationships that other family members might disapprove of for political, social, or religious reasons. Storage of personal possessions becomes politically charged when space is limited, and valuable items might be shared, borrowed, stolen, or damaged by family members whose access to your private belongings reflects their status within family hierarchy, while creating opportunities for conflicts that test family unity and challenge established authority relationships. So you manage your medieval household like a corporate executive running a complex organization where all the employees are relatives with their own agendas, all the business decisions affect personal relationships that extend across generations, and every day brings new opportunities for operational disagreements to escalate into conflicts that could damage family unity, undermine family political standing, and compromise family economic security for years or decades. Welcome to medieval domestic life, where family management required sophisticated administrative skills, household routines involved complex political considerations, daily decisions had long-term strategic implications, and every domestic choice could trigger the equivalent of a corporate civil war that tested everyone's commitment to family loyalty versus individual interests. As afternoon approaches in your medieval family compound, you've successfully avoided inheritance disputes, marriage conflicts, and household management disasters without being disowned, challenged to combat, or subjected to extended lectures about your inadequate appreciation for family traditions. Congratulations! Now comes perhaps the most emotionally challenging part of medieval family life. Dealing with children, where your parenting decisions could determine not just your children's happiness, but your family's political survival, your own spiritual salvation, and the continuation of family bloodlines that represent centuries of careful breeding and strategic alliance building. Medieval childhood wasn't the protected, nurtured, emotionally supportive experience that modern families try to provide through careful attention to child psychology, educational theory, and individual development needs. Children were economic assets, political tools, spiritual responsibilities, and future insurance policies that required careful management to ensure they developed into adults who would enhance rather than damage family interests while providing security for aging parents and continuation of family traditions. Every parenting decision was a calculated investment in your family's future, and mistakes could be costly for generations, affecting not just immediate family welfare, but extended family relationships, political alliances, and social standing that had taken decades to establish and could be destroyed by children who failed to meet family expectations or social requirements. Let's start with basic child-rearing practices, which were guided more by practical necessity, religious obligation, and social convention than emotional attachment, individual psychology, or modern concepts of child development that prioritize personal happiness over family duty and social conformity. Your children aren't primarily sources of personal joy, emotional fulfillment, or individual pride. They're future contributors to family welfare, whose development must be carefully managed to ensure they acquire the skills, social connections, religious knowledge, and character traits that will make them valuable family members rather than burdens who drain family resources without providing adequate returns on parental investment. Infant mortality rates mean that emotional attachment to very young children is both psychologically dangerous and practically unwise. Roughly half of all children die before age 5 from diseases, malnutrition, accidents, or complications that medieval medicine can't prevent or treat effectively. Investing too much emotional energy in babies is considered both impractical and spiritually unwise, as excessive attachment could interfere with acceptance of God's will and proper preparation for the likelihood that many children won't survive to contribute to family welfare. You love your children naturally, but you also maintain emotional distance that allows you to function effectively if they don't survive to adulthood, while ensuring that your primary loyalty remains to family welfare rather than individual children whose survival is uncertain and whose future contributions can't be guaranteed. Childhood education begins early and focuses on practical skills, social protocols, and religious knowledge rather than intellectual development for its own sake or individual creativity that might interfere with proper social conformity and family loyalty. Children learn reading, writing, and arithmetic only if these skills are necessary for their anticipated adult roles within family economic activities, political responsibilities, or religious obligations. Advanced education is expensive, time-consuming, and potentially dangerous if it encourages children to develop ideas about individual autonomy that conflict with family authority and social expectations. A son destined for church service needs different education than a son planned for military career, commercial activity, or estate management. Each career path requires specific knowledge, social connections, and character development that must be planned carefully to ensure children are prepared for their assigned roles without developing unrealistic expectations about alternative opportunities. Daughters receive education focused on household management, religious observance, social skills needed for successful marriages, and practical abilities that will make them valuable wives and mothers, rather than independent individuals with their own ambitions and preferences that might interfere with family marriage strategies. Discipline is considered a moral obligation, religious duty, and social responsibility that affects not just individual children, but family honor, spiritual welfare, and political standing in the community. Parents who fail to discipline children properly are viewed as inadequate family leaders who threaten social stability and religious order. Spare the rod, and you spoil the child, but you also fail in your duty as a parent, damage your family's reputation for proper child rearing, compromise your children's spiritual development, and potentially endanger their souls by allowing them to develop character flaws that could lead to spiritual damnation, social failure, and family disgrace. Physical punishment isn't just accepted, it's required by religious teaching, social convention, and practical necessity for ensuring children develop proper respect for authority, appropriate fear of consequences for misbehavior, and understanding that individual desires must be subordinated to family needs and social expectations. Religious education isn't optional spiritual enrichment that children can pursue according to personal inclination. It's a legal requirement, social obligation, and spiritual necessity that begins in infancy and continues throughout childhood with increasing complexity and intensity. Children must learn proper prayers that demonstrate family religious orthodoxy, understand basic theological concepts that enable participation in religious community life, and develop religious habits that will make them acceptable church members and spiritually safe family representatives who won't embarrass the family through religious ignorance or theological errors. Religious ignorance in children reflects badly on parental competence, family piety, and social standing while potentially exposing the entire family to suspicion of heresy, insufficient devotion, or dangerous independence from church authority that could result in social ostracism, legal prosecution, or spiritual damnation. But here's where medieval child rearing gets psychologically complex and emotionally devastating. Every parenting decision must balance children's individual needs, natural inclinations, and personal happiness against family strategic interests, social requirements, and economic necessities. And these considerations don't always align in ways that allow for optimal child development. Your younger son might show natural aptitude for scholarly pursuits, artistic creativity, or intellectual activities that could bring him personal fulfillment and individual recognition. But your family might need him to develop military skills, commercial abilities, or administrative capabilities that serve family economic interests rather than his personal inclinations or natural talents. Your daughter might prefer religious life that would allow her intellectual development, spiritual growth, and independence from family marriage politics. But your family might need her to make a politically advantageous marriage that enhances family social standing, creates valuable alliances, or provides economic benefits that outweigh her personal preferences and individual happiness. Career planning for children begins in early childhood and involves complex negotiations between parental preferences, family needs, available opportunities, social requirements, and economic realities that might change significantly between childhood planning and adult implementation. Children destined for church service must be identified early and educated accordingly with religious knowledge, Latin literacy, theological training, and social connections that prepare them for religious careers while removing them from family secular activities and creating potential conflicts between family loyalty and religious obligation. Children planned for military careers need physical training, martial education, social connections with military families, and character development that emphasizes honor, courage, and loyalty while exposing them to dangers that could result in death, disability, or psychological trauma that affects their ability to contribute to family welfare. Children intended for commercial activities need different skills, different social networks, and different character traits that emphasize practicality, financial acumen, and business relationships while potentially exposing family assets to commercial risks and creating social tensions with families whose political aspirations prioritize military or religious service over commercial success. Marriage planning for children starts almost from birth and requires careful coordination with other families' marriage strategies. Economic planning that accounts for dowry requirements and inheritance expectations, and political calculation that anticipates social and political developments that might not occur for 15 to 20 years. Your daughter's marriage prospects depend on her dowry size, her education and social skills, her personal characteristics and physical appearance, her family's political connections and social standing, and the political situation at the time she reaches marriageable age, all of which must be planned and managed throughout her childhood without knowing what circumstances will exist when marriage negotiations actually begin. Planning her future requires predicting social and political developments, economic conditions, family political relationships, and individual personality development that might change dramatically during the years between childhood planning and adult implementation of marriage strategies. Gender roles are strictly defined and rigorously enforced through childhood education, daily family life, religious instruction, and social pressure that begins in infancy and continues throughout childhood with increasing intensity and specificity. Boys and girls receive different education, different moral instruction, different behavioral expectations, and different preparation for their adult responsibilities based on rigid gender categories that don't allow for individual variation, personal preference, or natural inclination that conflicts with social requirements. Failure to properly prepare children for their gender-specific roles could make them unsuitable for marriage, religious service, or social acceptance in their adult communities, while reflecting badly on family competence and potentially damaging family political relationships with other families whose cooperation depends on confidence in your family's ability to produce appropriate marriage partners and social allies. Economic contributions from children are expected and necessary for family survival, not exploitative labor practices, but educational experiences that prepare them for adult responsibilities, while providing economic benefits that help support the entire family during children's dependent years. Children work in family businesses, help with agricultural labor, assist with household management, and contribute to family commercial activities from an early age. Child labor isn't exploitation, it's education that teaches practical skills, family loyalty, work discipline, and social responsibility, while providing economic value that helps justify the expense of feeding, clothing, and housing children until they can contribute more substantially to family welfare. Apprenticeship arrangements require complex negotiations with other families, professional guilds, and commercial enterprises that could enhance children's career prospects while creating obligations, expenses, and risks that must be balanced against potential benefits. Placing children in appropriate apprenticeships affects their entire future career prospects, social standing, economic opportunities, and family political relationships. Choose poorly, and your child might struggle economically for their entire adult life while reflecting badly on family judgment and planning capabilities. Choose well, and you're providing opportunities that could enhance your family's social and economic position while creating new political relationships and commercial connections that benefit the entire extended family network. Inheritance planning affects parent-child relationships throughout childhood and into adulthood, creating family dynamics where children's behavior, educational achievements, marriage choices, and loyalty to family interests are constantly evaluated as factors that might influence their inheritance prospects and family status. Children who will inherit family property require different preparation than children who must make their own way in the world through military service, religious careers, or commercial activities. Inheritance expectations influence children's behavior, educational priorities, relationship with siblings, and attitude toward family authority throughout their lives. Legal responsibilities for children's behavior mean that parenting mistakes can have serious legal, political, and economic consequences for the entire family. Children who develop behavioral problems, commit crimes, or make social mistakes reflect badly on parental competence and family moral standards, while potentially creating legal problems that could affect family property, political relationships, and social standing. In extreme cases, children's misbehavior can damage family political relationships, create legal obligations that strain family resources, or result in social ostracism that affects the entire family's ability to maintain political alliances, commercial relationships, and marriage opportunities for other family members. So you raise your medieval children like a combination of teacher, military trainer, political strategist, and spiritual advisor, constantly balancing their individual development against family needs, while ensuring they acquire the skills, knowledge, character traits, and social connections that will make them successful adults and valuable family members, rather than burdens who drain family resources without providing adequate returns on parental investment. Welcome to medieval parenting, where child rearing was strategic planning, childhood was preparation for adult responsibilities, individual happiness was subordinated to family welfare, and every parenting decision could determine your family's future success or failure for generations. The sun is reaching its zenith over your medieval family compound, and you've managed to survive inheritance law, marriage politics, household management, and child-rearing challenges without being disinherited, challenged to trial by combat, or subjected to extended family interventions about your inadequate commitment to family traditions. Impressive. Now comes the part of your medieval family experience that could literally destroy your lineage in the most spectacular fashion possible. Dealing with extended family, a network of relatives so complex, so politically charged, and so potentially lethal that it makes modern family reunions look like peaceful meditation retreats conducted by professional therapists. Your medieval extended family isn't just a collection of people you see during holidays, religious festivals, and life cycle celebrations. It's a political alliance system that spans multiple generations, numerous geographic regions, complex webs of obligation and mutual dependence, and strategic relationships that could determine your family's survival during wars, economic crises, legal disputes, or social upheavals that require coordinated responses from family networks rather than individual family units. Understanding these relationships requires the analytical skills of a professional diplomat, the memory capacity of a trained genealogist, the strategic thinking of a military commander, and the psychological insight of an experienced counselor who understands how personal relationships interact with political necessities across extended periods of time and changing circumstances. Let's start with your grandparents, who aren't just elderly relatives to be visited occasionally for sentimental reasons or religious obligations. They're potential sources of inheritance, political influence, family authority, and strategic guidance that could override your parents' decisions about everything from marriage arrangements to property management, religious obligations, and political alliances. Grandparents who retain control over family assets, political connections, or religious authority can essentially dictate family policy well into their final years, while creating succession uncertainties that affect multiple generations of family planning and strategic decision-making. Your grandfather might control family property that provides essential income for multiple family branches, creating economic dependencies that require careful management of relationships with elderly relatives whose health, mental capacity, and political judgment might be declining, while their economic influence remains crucial for family welfare. Your grandmother might maintain social connections with other families that provide essential political protection, commercial opportunities, or marriage prospects for younger family members, making her approval necessary for family strategic planning even when her understanding of current political circumstances might be limited or outdated. Your aunts and uncles represent potential allies, political resources, or dangerous rivals whose own family ambitions, economic interests, and political commitments might conflict with your family's interests in ways that create internal family competition for resources, influence, and strategic advantages. An uncle with military connections could provide essential support during political conflicts, military service opportunities for young male family members, or protection during periods of social instability that threaten family security and economic welfare. But he might also compete for family resources, attempt to arrange marriages that benefit his children at the expense of yours, or pursue political strategies that conflict with your family's interests while expecting family loyalty and support for initiatives that don't serve your immediate family's welfare. Every family gathering is essentially a diplomatic summit where multiple family branches negotiate informal treaties, trade information about political developments and economic opportunities, evaluate potential marriage alliances, and assess each other's political reliability and economic stability while maintaining the appearance of family unity and mutual affection. Cousin relationships are particularly complex and politically dangerous because cousins are close enough genetically and socially to be useful allies, potential marriage partners, and sources of mutual support, but distant enough to be serious competitors for inheritance, marriage opportunities, political influence, and social standing within extended family networks. First cousins might compete for inheritance from grandparents whose property could significantly enhance their economic prospects and social standing while creating resentment and ongoing conflict between family branches that continue for generations after the original inheritance disputes are resolved. Second cousins might compete for marriage opportunities with other noble families whose alliance could enhance family political standing, but whose limited availability means that one family's success necessarily comes at the expense of other family branches' strategic objectives. Third cousins might find themselves on opposite sides of political conflicts that divide extended family loyalties, creating situations where family relationships must be balanced against political survival and where traditional family loyalty conflicts with immediate political necessities. Marriage connections exponentially multiply the complexity of extended family relationships while creating new sources of potential conflict, political opportunity, and strategic vulnerability that must be managed carefully to maintain family unity while pursuing individual family interests. When your sister marries into another family, you're not just gaining a brother-in-law whose personal qualities might enhance or diminish family social standing, you're becoming connected to his entire extended family network, including relatives whose political allegiances, economic interests, religious commitments, and personal feuds might suddenly affect your own family's welfare in ways you can't predict or control. Her new family might expect political support during disputes with families that have been your traditional allies, creating conflicts of loyalty that test your commitment to sister versus political strategy, while potentially damaging relationships that have provided essential family protection and advancement opportunities. They might request economic assistance during financial difficulties that strain your family resources while providing benefits that primarily serve their interests rather than yours, creating ongoing obligations that limit your family's strategic flexibility and resource allocation for other family priorities. In-law relationships require particularly careful management because they involve family loyalty conflicts that could become serious political problems, economic liabilities, and social complications that affect multiple generations of family planning and strategic decision-making. Your sister's new family might expect support during disputes with families that have been your traditional allies, forcing you to choose between family loyalty and political strategy while potentially damaging relationships that provide essential protection and advancement opportunities. Your brother's wife might bring her family's enemies into conflict with your previously peaceful relatives, creating new sources of political danger and social tension that require diplomatic management while potentially exposing your family to conflicts that don't serve your strategic interests. Marriage alliances create obligations that extend far beyond the immediate couple, involving entire extended family networks in ongoing relationships that must be maintained through gift exchanges, political support, social cooperation, and mutual assistance during crises that might continue for decades after the original marriage arrangements are completed. Religious vocations among extended family members create additional complications because relatives who enter church service develop loyalties to religious authorities that might conflict with family interests, political strategies, and economic needs while creating new sources of spiritual authority and social influence within family networks. A cousin who becomes a priest might be expected to support family interests through religious influence, political connections with church authorities, and spiritual guidance that enhances family social standing and political protection. But he also has obligations to church hierarchy, religious law, and spiritual principles that could make him unreliable during family political crises, where family loyalty conflicts with religious duty, canonical law, or spiritual obligations that prioritize church welfare over family interests. Religious relatives might provide valuable political connections with church authorities, spiritual guidance that enhances family religious standing, and social influence that protects family interests during periods of religious persecution or theological controversy. But they might also demand family resources for religious charitable activities, expect family support for church political objectives that conflict with family strategic interests, or criticize family activities that they consider spiritually inappropriate, even when such activities are necessary for family economic survival or political protection. Military service obligations among male relatives create networks of mutual dependency that extend far beyond immediate family relationships, while creating new sources of political influence, economic opportunity, and strategic vulnerability that must be carefully managed to maximize benefits while minimizing risks. Your uncle's military service connects your family to his military commander, his fellow soldiers, and their families, creating potential political relationships that could provide protection during conflicts, advancement opportunities for young male family members, and access to political information that enhances family strategic planning. These military networks can provide essential support during political conflicts, protection during periods of social instability, and economic opportunities through military service. But they can also draw your family into wars that have nothing to do with your own political interests, while creating obligations that strain family resources and expose family members to military dangers. Military relatives might provide valuable protection during conflicts, political connections with military authorities, and opportunities for advancement through military service that enhance family social standing and political influence. But they might also demand family support for military campaigns that don't serve family interests, expect economic assistance for military equipment and supplies that strain family resources, or create political obligations that conflict with family diplomatic strategies and commercial relationships. Geographic distribution of extended family creates communication and coordination challenges that affect everything from marriage negotiations to inheritance disputes, political strategy, and crisis management, while complicating efforts to maintain family unity and coordinate family responses to changing circumstances. Relatives in distant regions might have different political allegiances based on local circumstances, different economic interests that reflect regional conditions, and different information about political developments that affect family welfare, but might not reach all family branches simultaneously or accurately. Maintaining relationships across geographic distances requires constant effort, significant expense, and sophisticated communication systems that might not be available during periods of political conflict, military campaigns, or natural disasters that disrupt transportation and communication networks. Family members in different regions might develop different perspectives on family strategy, different priorities for resource allocation, and different ideas about appropriate responses to political developments based on their local circumstances and regional relationships rather than overall family strategic interests. Generational conflicts within extended families affect family decision-making and resource allocation in ways that can paralyze family political effectiveness while creating ongoing tensions that affect multiple generations of family relationships and strategic planning. Older generations might have different ideas about political alliances, economic strategies, marriage arrangements, and religious obligations than younger family members who will have to live with the consequences of decisions made by elderly relatives whose understanding of current circumstances might be limited or outdated. Younger generations might prefer different approaches to family strategy, resource allocation, and relationship management that reflect changing political circumstances, economic opportunities, and social conditions that older family members don't understand or appreciate. These generational conflicts can create family paralysis, where decisions are delayed or avoided rather than resolved. Family resources are wasted on internal conflicts rather than external opportunities, and family strategic effectiveness is compromised by ongoing internal disputes about fundamental questions of family direction and priority. Legal disputes involving extended family can escalate into multi-generational conflicts that consume family resources, damage family political standing, and create permanent divisions within family networks that affect multiple generations of family relationships and strategic coordination. Property disputes between cousins can involve entire family branches in legal proceedings that last for decades, while consuming resources that could be used for family advancement, political activities, or economic investment that would benefit everyone rather than lawyers and court officials. Inheritance conflicts can divide extended families into competing factions that undermine family political influence while creating ongoing resentment and mistrust that affects future cooperation and strategic coordination even after legal disputes are formally resolved. Contract disputes involving family business relationships can escalate into broader family conflicts that affect marriage alliances, political relationships, and social standing, while creating ongoing obligations and animosities that complicate family strategic planning for generations. Death and succession within extended family regularly reshape family political dynamics in ways that require constant adaptation of family strategies, relationship management, and resource allocation while creating new opportunities and threats that must be addressed quickly and effectively. The death of a powerful uncle might eliminate important political connections while creating new inheritance opportunities, but it might also expose family vulnerabilities that were previously protected by his influence and create succession disputes that divide family resources and attention. The succession of a cousin to important family property might alter the balance of power within extended family networks, while creating new opportunities for cooperation or competition depending on the successor's personality, political commitments, and relationship with other family branches. Changes in family leadership can affect everything from political alliances and economic strategies to marriage negotiations and religious obligations, while requiring diplomatic adjustments that maintain family unity and strategic effectiveness during periods of transition and uncertainty. Economic obligations to extended family members create ongoing financial pressures that affect your immediate family's economic planning, resource allocation, and strategic flexibility, while creating moral obligations that must be balanced against practical family needs and limitations. Contributing to cousins' marriage dowries, supporting relatives during economic difficulties, maintaining extended family properties, and providing assistance during crises all require significant financial resources that must be balanced against your immediate family's needs for economic security, political advancement, and strategic investment. These obligations can provide political benefits through enhanced family relationships, social advantages through demonstrated family loyalty, and strategic value through strengthened family networks, but they can also strain family resources and limit strategic flexibility during periods when economic resources are limited or other opportunities require immediate attention. Social obligations to extended family require ongoing attention to relationship maintenance that consumes time, energy, and resources needed for other family activities while creating expectations that must be met consistently to maintain family political relationships and social standing. Attending extended family celebrations, supporting relatives during crises, mediating disputes between family branches, and maintaining regular communication with geographically distant relatives all require diplomatic skills and emotional energy that might be needed for immediate family concerns, political activities, or economic opportunities. These social obligations can provide valuable information about political developments, economic opportunities, and social changes, while strengthening family networks and maintaining political relationships that provide protection and advancement opportunities. But they can also become burdensome when family resources are limited, family conflicts require immediate attention, or external opportunities demand focused effort that might be compromised by extended family obligations and expectations. So you navigate your extended family relationships like a foreign minister managing a complex alliance system where personal relationships, political calculations, economic interests, social obligations, and strategic necessities constantly interact in ways that could strengthen your family's position or destroy it entirely, while requiring diplomatic skills, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence that most people don't possess, but everyone needs to survive medieval family politics. Welcome to medieval extended family dynamics, where every relative was a potential ally or dangerous enemy. Managing family relationships required the skills of a professional diplomat, and family unity depended on successfully balancing competing interests, conflicting loyalties, and complex obligations that extended across generations and geographic distances, while constantly adapting to changing circumstances that could transform family advantages into vulnerabilities overnight. As evening approaches over your medieval family stronghold, you've somehow navigated inheritance disputes, marriage politics, household management, child-rearing challenges, and extended family diplomacy without being disinherited, challenged to mortal combat, or subjected to family interventions that question your competence, loyalty, and commitment to family welfare. Remarkable. Now comes the final test of your medieval family survival skills. Dealing with family crises, where illness, death, political upheaval, economic disaster, or natural catastrophes could destroy everything your family has built across generations, while testing every relationship you've carefully maintained and every alliance you've strategically developed. Medieval families lived in constant awareness that crisis could strike without warning, and that family survival depended on how effectively everyone worked together during emergencies while maintaining family unity, strategic focus, and resource allocation that prioritized long-term family welfare over individual comfort and immediate gratification. Unlike modern families that can rely on social services, insurance systems, government assistance, professional emergency services, and institutional support during crises, medieval families faced disasters with only their own resources, extended family networks, political allies, and whatever support they could obtain through religious institutions whose own resources might be overwhelmed by widespread emergencies. Let's start with illness, which wasn't just a personal health crisis requiring medical attention and family emotional support. It was a family economic emergency, political vulnerability, and succession crisis that could paralyze family operations while creating opportunities for rival families to exploit family weaknesses and advance their own interests at your expense. When the head of household became seriously ill, family decision-making authority had to be redistributed among family members who might have competing ideas about medical treatment, economic management, political strategy, and succession planning, while maintaining family unity and preventing internal conflicts that could destroy family effectiveness during precisely the period when external threats were greatest. Serious illness could paralyze family operations by removing essential leadership, creating uncertainty about long-term planning, and forcing family members to divide their attention between patient care and ongoing family responsibilities, while rival families assessed whether illness represented opportunities for competitive advantage. Succession uncertainties created by serious illness encouraged rival families to exploit family vulnerabilities through political pressure, economic competition, legal challenges, or marriage negotiations that took advantage of family weakness, while family attention and resources were focused on medical care rather than strategic defense. Medieval medical treatment was expensive, unreliable, and often dangerous, requiring family resources that might be desperately needed for other purposes while providing uncertain benefits that might not justify the expense, risk, or diversion of family attention from other critical responsibilities. Religious aspects of illness required family resources for spiritual care, charitable donations, and religious ceremonies that were considered essential for patient recovery and family spiritual welfare, but competed with practical medical expenses and ongoing family operational needs. Death of family members created immediate succession crises that required rapid resolution to prevent family assets from being seized by competitors, legal challenges from rival claimants, or political interference from authorities who might have their own interests in family property and political relationships. Medieval inheritance law was complex, often contradictory, and subject to interpretation by authorities who might have their own political motivations for supporting particular family claims while opposing others based on considerations that had nothing to do with legal precedent or family merit. Death could transform stable family situations into legal and political battlefields within days, requiring immediate mobilization of family resources, political allies, and legal expertise, while family members were dealing with grief, succession planning, and ongoing operational responsibilities that couldn't be suspended during family emergencies. Succession disputes could escalate into multi-generational conflicts that consumed family resources, damaged family political relationships, and created permanent divisions within family networks, while providing opportunities for external enemies to advance their interests at family expense. Religious obligations associated with death required expensive funeral ceremonies, charitable donations, and ongoing spiritual observances that strained family resources while providing limited practical benefits during periods when family survival might depend on maintaining operational effectiveness rather than demonstrating religious devotion. Economic crises affected entire families simultaneously because medieval families operated as integrated economic units where individual financial problems became family-wide disasters that threatened everyone's security, social standing, and survival prospects, while requiring coordinated responses that tested family unity and strategic planning. Crop failures, trade disruptions, military campaigns, political upheavals, or economic changes could eliminate family income while creating new expenses that required immediate attention and long-term planning that might conflict with family members' individual interests and immediate needs. Economic survival during crises required family cooperation and resource sharing that tested every family relationship under extreme pressure while forcing difficult decisions about resource allocation, strategic priorities, and individual sacrifice that could create permanent resentment and ongoing conflict. Family members who might normally maintain polite relationships while pursuing their own interests found themselves completely dependent on each other for basic survival, while competing for limited resources that might not be adequate for everyone's needs and expectations. Political conflicts created loyalty dilemmas that could divide families when different family members had competing obligations to different political authorities, conflicting interests in political outcomes, and different assessments of political risks and opportunities that required immediate decisions with long-term consequences. Civil wars, succession disputes, international conflicts, or changes in royal policy could force family members to choose sides in ways that pitted family loyalty against political survival, while creating permanent divisions based on political decisions that seemed necessary at the time but proved disastrous when political circumstances changed. Making the wrong political choices could result in exile that destroyed family social foundations, property confiscation that eliminated family economic resources, or execution that permanently removed family members from strategic planning and succession arrangements while creating ongoing political liabilities for surviving family members. Family political relationships that had provided essential protection and advancement opportunities could be destroyed overnight by political developments that transformed allies into enemies while creating new political necessities that conflicted with traditional family loyalties and strategic commitments. Natural disasters affected entire regions simultaneously, creating widespread crises that overwhelmed local support systems and forced families to depend entirely on their own resources and extended family networks while competing with other families for scarce resources and opportunities that might be essential for survival. Floods, famines, epidemics, extreme weather, earthquakes, or other natural disasters could destroy family economic foundations while creating refugee situations that required complex negotiations for temporary shelter, emergency support, and long-term recovery planning that strained family resources and relationships. Regional disasters eliminated local economic opportunities while creating competition for scarce resources that tested family unity and required strategic decisions about resource allocation, geographic relocation, and relationship priorities that could affect family welfare for generations. Natural emergencies required immediate responses that might conflict with long-term family strategy while creating new dependencies on extended family networks and political allies, whose own resources might be strained by widespread regional difficulties. Military emergencies required immediate family responses that could disrupt normal family operations for months or years while creating new expenses, security vulnerabilities, and political obligations that affected family strategic planning and resource allocation during critical periods. Male family members might be conscripted for military service, leaving families without essential labor and leadership while creating military obligations that conflicted with family strategic interests and required family resources to support military equipment, supplies, and family members who might not survive military campaigns. Military campaigns could require financial contributions that strained family resources while creating security vulnerabilities that required constant vigilance and defensive preparations that diverted family attention from economic activities and political advancement opportunities. Wartime conditions affected everything from trade relationships and economic opportunities to marriage negotiations and social stability, while creating political pressures that forced families to demonstrate loyalty through expensive contributions and dangerous commitments that might not serve family strategic interests. Legal crises could arise suddenly when family members were accused of crimes, when family property rights were challenged, or when family business activities attracted unwanted attention from authorities who might have their own political or economic interests in family assets and relationships. Medieval legal systems were complex, expensive, unpredictable, and often corrupt, so legal problems could consume family resources while creating political vulnerabilities that affected family standing for generations and required ongoing attention that diverted resources from other family priorities. Legal proceedings could drag on for years while consuming enormous resources and creating ongoing uncertainty that paralyzed family strategic planning and created opportunities for enemies to exploit family vulnerabilities during extended periods of legal distraction. Defending against legal challenges required political allies, expensive legal representation, and ongoing diplomatic activities that might conflict with other family priorities while providing uncertain benefits that might not justify the expense and effort required to achieve favorable legal outcomes. Religious crises affected family spiritual welfare and social standing when family members were accused of heresy, when family religious practices attracted criticism from church authorities, or when family political activities conflicted with religious obligations and canonical requirements that were enforced by ecclesiastical courts with their own political agendas. Religious problems could lead to social isolation that damaged family political relationships, economic penalties that strained family resources, or legal prosecution that threatened family members with imprisonment, property confiscation, or execution while damaging family reputation and social standing. Church conflicts required careful diplomatic management that balanced family political interests against religious obligations while maintaining relationships with ecclesiastical authorities whose support might be essential for family political protection and social advancement. Religious controversies could escalate into broader political conflicts that divided families along religious lines while creating ongoing obligations to demonstrate religious orthodoxy through expensive charitable contributions and religious observances that competed with other family priorities. Social crises arose when family honor was challenged through personal insults, business disputes, conflicts over marriage arrangements, or social slights that required family responses to maintain social standing and political relationships that provided essential protection and advancement opportunities. Family reputation was a crucial political and economic asset that required constant maintenance through appropriate social behavior, generous hospitality, and responses to challenges that demonstrated family strength and commitment to honor while avoiding conflicts that could escalate into dangerous feuds. Challenges to family honor required immediate attention that might involve legal action, political negotiation, economic pressure, social ostracism, or potentially violence that carried significant risks while potentially providing essential protection for family social standing and political relationships. Social conflicts could escalate into multi-generational feuds that consumed family resources while creating ongoing security concerns and political complications that affected family strategic planning and limited family flexibility in pursuing other opportunities. Crisis management required family cooperation and resource sharing that tested every family relationship under extreme pressure, while revealing family strengths and weaknesses in ways that could permanently alter family dynamics and strategic planning after immediate crises were resolved. Family members who might normally maintain polite relationships while pursuing individual interests found themselves dependent on each other for basic survival while making decisions about resource allocation, strategic priorities, and individual sacrifice that affected family relationships for decades after immediate emergencies were resolved. Crisis revealed which family members could be trusted with essential responsibilities, which relationships provided genuine support during difficulties, and which strategic commitments were worth maintaining when family survival was threatened by external pressures and internal conflicts. Emergency situations forced families to make rapid decisions about priorities, resource allocation, and strategic commitments without adequate information about likely outcomes, while establishing precedents that affected family relationships and strategic planning for years after immediate crises were resolved. Communication during crises was essential but difficult when family members were geographically separated and communication systems were slow, unreliable, and potentially compromised by enemies who might intercept family communications for competitive advantage or political intelligence. Coordinating family responses to emergencies required information sharing and decision-making processes that might take weeks to complete, while crises demanded immediate action that couldn't wait for consultation with all relevant family members and political allies. Family communication systems had to balance security concerns against the need for rapid coordination while ensuring that essential family members received accurate information about crisis developments and family responses that might require their immediate participation or support. Emergency communication required trusted messengers, secure transportation, and backup systems that could function when normal communication networks were disrupted by natural disasters, military campaigns, or political conflicts that made routine communication dangerous or impossible. Resource allocation during emergencies required family decisions about priorities that could have long-term consequences for family welfare, while forcing difficult choices between competing family needs with inadequate information about likely outcomes and available alternatives. Should available resources be used to protect family property that might provide long-term security, support family members in immediate danger who might not survive without immediate assistance, or maintain family political relationships that might provide future protection but required ongoing investment during periods when family resources were severely limited? These decisions often required choosing between competing family needs with inadequate information about likely outcomes, while establishing precedents that affected family strategic planning and resource allocation for years after immediate emergencies were resolved. Emergency resource allocation tested family unity by forcing difficult decisions about individual sacrifice, family priorities, and strategic commitments, while revealing family members' true commitment to family welfare versus individual interests during periods when personal survival might depend on family support. Recovery from crises required long-term family planning and cooperation that might take years to complete successfully, while rebuilding family economic foundations, restoring family political relationships, and recovering family social standing through sustained effort and cooperation from family members who might be exhausted from crisis management and struggling with their own personal losses and ongoing trauma. Rebuilding family economic foundations after disasters required careful allocation of limited resources, strategic planning that accounted for changed circumstances, and patience with slow recovery processes that might take decades to restore family wealth and economic security to pre-crisis levels. Restoring family political relationships damaged by crisis decisions required diplomatic efforts that acknowledged past conflicts while demonstrating renewed commitment to alliance obligations and mutual support that could rebuild trust and cooperation with political allies whose own circumstances might have changed significantly. Recovering family social standing required consistent demonstration of family strength, stability, and commitment to traditional social obligations through expensive hospitality, generous charitable contributions, and participation in social activities that restored family reputation while competing with practical needs for resource conservation and economic rebuilding. Long-term recovery planning required balancing immediate family needs against future strategic objectives while maintaining family unity and cooperation during extended periods of economic uncertainty, political vulnerability, and social adjustment that tested everyone's commitment to family welfare and long-term strategic thinking. So you managed medieval family crises like an emergency coordinator running disaster relief operations, where all the affected people were relatives with their own agendas. All the resources belonged to the family and had to be allocated according to complex political considerations, and every decision affected both immediate survival and long-term family welfare in ways that could influence family relationships and strategic positioning for generations. Welcome to medieval family crisis management, where emergencies tested every family relationship under extreme pressure. Survival depended on how effectively relatives could work together under the worst possible circumstances, and crisis recovery required sustained cooperation and strategic planning that could take decades to complete while maintaining family unity and political effectiveness in an increasingly complex and dangerous world. You've survived one complete day of medieval family life. Congratulations. You've navigated inheritance disputes, survived marriage politics, managed household operations, raised children strategically, maintained extended family relationships, and somehow made it through various family crises without being disowned, disinherited, challenged to trial by combat, or accidentally eliminated by relatives who found you inconvenient for their own strategic advancement. But here's the truly exhausting part. This isn't an unusually difficult day in medieval family life. This is just Tuesday in any reasonably prosperous family compound. Every single day of your medieval family existence will involve similar challenges, negotiations, potential conflicts, and strategic calculations that require diplomatic skills, political awareness, and emotional intelligence that most modern people never develop because they don't face similar pressures. Every decision you make affects not just your own welfare, but the welfare of dozens of other family members whose own ambitions, needs, and strategic interests might conflict with yours, while requiring ongoing coordination and cooperation that maintains family unity without sacrificing individual opportunities for advancement and personal fulfillment. Every relationship you maintain requires constant attention to complex obligations that balance personal affection against political necessity, individual desires against family strategic interests, and immediate needs against long-term planning that might extend across generations of family members who will inherit both family assets and family obligations. Every family gathering is essentially a diplomatic summit where informal negotiations determine resource allocation, political strategy, social positioning, and individual opportunities while maintaining the appearance of family harmony and mutual affection that conceals ongoing competition and potential conflicts that could destroy family effectiveness if they escalated into open confrontation. The romanticized medieval fantasy of close-knit families bound together by mutual love, shared hardship, and simple affection is largely fictional propaganda created by people who never experienced the reality of medieval family politics and don't understand the complex pressures that shaped family relationships in pre-modern societies. The reality was political calculation, economic pressure, social constraints, religious obligations, and the constant knowledge that family relationships were too important to be left to personal preference, individual choice, or emotional attachment that might interfere with strategic thinking and family welfare. Family harmony wasn't a natural state that occurred automatically when related people lived together and shared common interests. It was an achievement that required constant work, ongoing negotiation, and sophisticated management of competing interests, conflicting loyalties, and individual ambitions that had to be balanced against collective family welfare. Medieval families were certainly functional in the sense that they managed to maintain economic operations, political relationships, and social standing across generations in ways that allowed some families to accumulate enormous wealth, political influence, and social power that continued for centuries. But functionality came at the cost of individual autonomy, personal privacy, romantic freedom, career choice, and the luxury of maintaining relationships based purely on emotional affection rather than political necessity, economic calculation, and strategic advantage. Individual family members had to subordinate personal desires to family strategic interests, accept marriages arranged for political and economic reasons rather than personal preference, pursue careers that served family needs rather than individual inclinations, and maintain relationships that enhanced family welfare even when such relationships were personally unsatisfying or emotionally difficult. Yet despite all of this complexity, constraint, and pressure, medieval families did create genuine affection, loyalty, and emotional bonds that transcended mere political necessity and economic calculation while providing personal fulfillment, emotional security, and individual identity within systems that prioritized collective welfare over individual autonomy. They learned to find love within systems that prioritize duty, to create personal connections within structures designed for economic survival and political advancement, and to build emotional relationships that could survive the constant pressures of family politics, economic uncertainty, and social expectations that required ongoing adaptation to changing circumstances. Family members developed sophisticated skills for managing complex relationships that balanced individual needs against collective welfare while maintaining personal integrity and emotional authenticity within systems that could have easily destroyed individual identity and personal autonomy if people hadn't learned to navigate them skillfully. The medieval family system worked precisely because it acknowledged that individual desires and family welfare didn't always align, and it created mechanisms for managing these conflicts without destroying family unity, while providing opportunities for individual advancement and personal fulfillment within collective structures that served everyone's long-term interests. Modern families that assume love conquers all often struggle when individual interests diverge, when economic pressures create family stress, or when personal desires conflict with family obligations because they lack the institutional frameworks and cultural practices that medieval families used to manage such conflicts constructively. Medieval families expected conflicts between individual desires and collective welfare, and they had established procedures for resolving such conflicts through negotiation, compromise, and strategic planning that served both individual and collective interests while maintaining family unity and political effectiveness. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you can appreciate the remarkable complexity of family systems that manage to function effectively without the communication technologies, transportation systems, legal protections, social services, or economic opportunities that modern families take for granted. Medieval families created stability and continuity across generations using nothing but personal relationships, mutual obligations, shared commitment to family survival, and sophisticated understanding of how to balance competing interests within collective structures that served everyone's long-term welfare. Their achievement reminds us that family harmony has always required work, that family loyalty has always involved sacrifice, that successful family relationships require both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, and that the people who lived in previous eras faced family challenges that were different from ours but not necessarily simpler or easier to manage. Family success has never been automatic, and it has always required skills, commitment, and ongoing effort from everyone involved in ways that balance individual needs against collective welfare while adapting to changing circumstances that require flexibility, creativity, and resilience from everyone involved. So as you drift off to sleep in your private bedroom with your individual autonomy, your freedom to make personal choices about relationships and career, your access to professional counseling and legal protection, remember the millions of medieval family members who created deep, lasting bonds while navigating family systems that would challenge the most skilled modern diplomats and family therapists. Their examples remind us that family relationships are among the most complex and rewarding human achievements, requiring skills that combine emotional intelligence with strategic thinking, personal affection with political awareness, and individual development with collective responsibility in ways that serve both personal fulfillment and family welfare across generations. Now, let's step away from the politically charged atmosphere of medieval family compounds and travel to a different kind of family system entirely, one where survival depended on very different skills but no less courage, wisdom, and sophisticated understanding of how individual interests could be balanced against collective welfare. Long before she became one of the most famous women in American history, she was Pocahontas, a young Powhatan girl learning to navigate the complex family and political structures of early 17th century Virginia. Born around 1596 in what Europeans would call the New World, she entered a society where family relationships were as complex as any medieval European system, but governed by completely different rules, values, and strategic necessities. Her father, Wahunsenakau, was the paramount chief of the Powhatan Confederacy, a powerful alliance of roughly 30 Algonquian-speaking tribes that controlled much of the territory around Chesapeake Bay through sophisticated political arrangements, military coordination, and economic cooperation that required constant diplomatic management and strategic planning. This wasn't a simple tribal structure based on kinship and tradition. It was a sophisticated political system where family relationships, marriage alliances, succession protocols, and resource allocation determined the balance of power across thousands of square miles of territory while managing relationships between dozens of independent communities with their own interests, traditions, and strategic objectives. Pocahontas grew up understanding that her personal relationships had political implications that extended far beyond her immediate family and affected the welfare of thousands of people whose survival depended on her father's ability to maintain Confederation unity while managing external threats and internal conflicts that could destroy the entire political system. As the daughter of a paramount chief, her potential marriages, her friendships, her daily activities, and even her personal behavior were viewed through the lens of tribal diplomacy and intergroup relations, while requiring her to balance individual desires against political necessities that affected everyone in the Confederation. Her childhood education focused on the skills she would need as an adult woman in Powhatan society. Agricultural techniques that ensured food security, food preparation methods that maximized nutritional value, textile production that provided essential materials, and the complex social protocols that governed relationships between different clans, tribes, and political factions within the Confederation structure. But she also learned the political skills that would be essential for someone of her rank: diplomacy that could resolve conflicts without violence, negotiation techniques that could create mutually beneficial agreements, and the ability to maintain relationships across cultural boundaries while representing her people's interests effectively in complex political situations. When English colonists established Jamestown in 1607, Pocahontas was about 11 years old enough to understand that these strangers represented both unprecedented opportunity and existential threat for her people, requiring new approaches to diplomacy and relationship management that had no precedent in traditional Powhatan political practice. The English weren't just another tribe to be incorporated into existing alliance systems through traditional marriage arrangements, tribute relationships, and political negotiations. They were something entirely new that required innovative approaches to cultural bridge building and strategic management that balanced traditional Powhatan interests against completely unfamiliar European political and economic systems. Her famous relationship with Captain John Smith, whether romantic or purely diplomatic, demonstrated her early understanding that cultural bridge building required personal relationships that transcended traditional tribal boundaries while maintaining her own cultural identity and representing her people's interests effectively in cross-cultural negotiations. She was learning to navigate between two completely different family and political systems while maintaining her cultural integrity, political effectiveness, and personal relationships that served both individual and collective interests in an increasingly complex and dangerous situation. When she was captured by English colonists in 1613, Pocahontas found herself in a position that would have been familiar to many medieval European women: a political hostage whose treatment and eventual marriage would be determined by negotiations between male leaders who viewed her primarily as a diplomatic asset rather than an individual with her own rights, preferences, and strategic value. But unlike medieval European women in similar situations, Pocahontas possessed cultural knowledge and diplomatic skills that made her valuable to both sides of the colonial conflict in ways that gave her agency and influence even within the constraints of her captivity and political subordination. She could serve as interpreter, cultural mediator, and political negotiator in ways that gave her significant influence over colonial relationships while creating new kinds of diplomatic opportunities that neither English nor Powhatan political systems had previously imagined or developed. Her conversion to Christianity and marriage to John Rolfe weren't just personal decisions about religious belief and romantic attachment. They were political acts that created new kinds of family relationships that combined English and Powhatan traditions in unprecedented ways while serving both individual and collective interests in innovative approaches to cross-cultural cooperation. She was creating a new model for cross-cultural family formation that had implications far beyond her individual situation and could potentially serve as a template for peaceful coexistence between European and Native American societies that had previously seemed incompatible in their basic approaches to family structure, political organization, and economic cooperation. When she traveled to England in 1616, Pocahontas was serving as a cultural ambassador who represented not just her own family, but entire societies that were learning to coexist in colonial America while demonstrating the possibility that cultural differences could be bridged through personal relationships, strategic cooperation, and innovative approaches to family formation. Her reception in English society demonstrated both the possibilities and the limitations of cross-cultural family relationships while revealing the prejudices, assumptions, and political calculations that affected how European societies viewed Native American people and their potential for cultural adaptation and political cooperation. Her death in England in 1617, just as she was preparing to return to Virginia, cut short what might have been a remarkable career as a cultural bridge builder who could help create new kinds of family structures that incorporated the best elements of both English and Powhatan traditions while serving the interests of both societies. Pocahontas had demonstrated that family relationships could transcend cultural boundaries when individuals possessed the courage, intelligence, diplomatic skills, and cultural knowledge necessary to create new models for cross-cultural cooperation that served both individual and collective interests, while respecting cultural differences and maintaining cultural integrity. Her legacy reminds us that family systems are not fixed structures determined by biology or tradition, but evolving relationships that can adapt to new circumstances when people are willing to innovate, experiment, and create new approaches to family formation that serve changing needs and circumstances. The young woman who had grown up navigating the complex family politics of Powhatan society became a symbol of the possibility that different cultures could create new kinds of family relationships based on mutual respect, strategic cooperation, and innovative approaches to cultural bridge building rather than domination, subordination, or cultural assimilation that destroyed cultural diversity and individual identity. Her story demonstrates that family success requires not just emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, but also cultural sensitivity, diplomatic skills, and the courage to create new approaches to family relationships when traditional systems prove inadequate for new circumstances and challenges. Now let's travel forward through time to meet another woman who challenged traditional family structures, but in a very different cultural context, where social constraints were less violent, but no less restrictive in their effects on individual freedom and family relationships. By the time Jane Austen was born in 1775 in Steventon, Hampshire, English family life had evolved considerably from its medieval origins, but it still operated according to rigid social rules that determined everything from marriage prospects to inheritance rights, career opportunities, and individual autonomy in ways that profoundly affected family relationships and individual happiness. She would spend her life observing and critiquing these family systems through novels that revealed both their subtle psychological cruelties and their hidden social mechanisms, while demonstrating the possibility that family relationships could be improved through individual moral development, social reform, and more enlightened approaches to balancing individual desires against collective welfare. Her own family background gave her intimate knowledge of how English social hierarchies affected family relationships, marriage prospects, economic security, and individual opportunities, while demonstrating both the strengths and weaknesses of family systems that prioritized social stability over individual fulfillment. Her father was a rector with limited income, but respectable social standing, decent education, and genuine concern for his children's welfare. Her mother came from a more elevated social background, but brought little money to the marriage while maintaining social pretensions that sometimes conflicted with family economic realities and practical necessities. This combination of respectability and financial constraint was typical of the minor gentry class that Austen would examine so brilliantly in her fiction, while demonstrating her understanding of how economic pressures affected family relationships, individual choices, and social dynamics in ways that were often invisible to people who didn't experience such constraints directly. Growing up in a large family with 7 siblings, Jane observed firsthand how different personality types navigated family expectations and social pressures while pursuing individual happiness within systems that often prioritized family strategic interests over personal preferences and individual fulfillment. Some siblings married for love and achieved personal happiness within conventional social arrangements. Others married for security and achieved economic stability while sacrificing personal preferences. Still, others remained single rather than accept unsuitable matches while facing economic insecurity and social marginalization. These family dynamics provided the raw material for the complex family relationships that populate her novels, while demonstrating her understanding of how social systems affected individual choices, family relationships, and personal development in ways that could either enhance or diminish human happiness and social progress. Her education was better than most women of her era received, partly because her family valued learning and intellectual development, and partly because they couldn't afford the fashionable finishing schools that prepared upper-class girls for marriage markets, rather than intellectual development or personal fulfillment. This gave her the intellectual tools to analyze family and social systems with a clarity that escaped many of her contemporaries, while providing her with the knowledge and perspective necessary to critique social arrangements that might otherwise have seemed natural, inevitable, or divinely ordained. Economic pressures within her own family helped her understand how financial considerations affected every aspect of family life, from daily routines and social activities to marriage prospects and career opportunities, while demonstrating the psychological and social costs of economic insecurity that affected family relationships and individual development. The constant worry about money, the careful calculations required for even modest social activities, and the knowledge that economic security depended entirely on male relatives' success, created family dynamics that prioritized financial security over personal preferences while limiting individual opportunities for autonomy and self-development. When her father died in 1805, Jane and her mother and sister found themselves in the precarious position of unmarried women without independent income, depending entirely on the generosity of male relatives for basic survival while experiencing personally the economic vulnerabilities that she explored so effectively in her novels. This experience of economic dependence and social vulnerability gave her intimate knowledge of how family systems could fail to provide adequate security for individual family members, while demonstrating the need for social reforms that would give people more economic opportunities and personal autonomy. Her decision to remain unmarried wasn't just a personal choice about romantic relationships. It was a form of social criticism that demonstrated the limitations of a family system that offered women few alternatives to marriage, while requiring them to subordinate personal preferences to family strategic interests and social expectations. By choosing independence over security, she was challenging assumptions about what constituted a successful female life, while demonstrating that individual fulfillment might require rejecting conventional social arrangements that prioritized collective welfare over personal autonomy and individual development. Her writing career developed partly as a response to family financial pressures and partly as a way to explore the social systems she observed around her, while demonstrating the possibility that individual talent and creativity could provide economic independence and social influence even within restrictive social systems. Her novels weren't just entertainment or romantic fantasy, they were social analysis that revealed how family structures affected individual happiness, social progress, and human development, while suggesting ways that family systems could be improved through individual moral development and gradual social reform. Her portrayal of family relationships in novels like Pride and Prejudice and Emma demonstrated her understanding that family harmony required both individual moral development and social reforms that would give people more freedom to form relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than economic necessity, social pressure, or family strategic interests. She showed how economic constraints, social prejudices, and family pressures could distort natural affection and prevent the formation of healthy relationships, while demonstrating that individual intelligence, moral development, and social sensitivity could overcome many of these obstacles when people were committed to both personal growth and social improvement. The subtle irony that characterizes her writing style reflected her ability to maintain affection for family and social systems, while simultaneously critiquing their limitations and suggesting possibilities for improvement that didn't require revolutionary change, but gradual reform through individual moral development and social enlightenment. She could see both the value and the problems in traditional family structures, while demonstrating that criticism and reform could enhance rather than destroy family relationships when people were committed to both preserving what was valuable in traditional systems and improving what was harmful or limiting. When Jane Austen died in 1817 at age 41, she left behind novels that continue to influence how people think about family relationships, social obligations, and the balance between individual desires and social responsibilities, while demonstrating that literature could serve as a vehicle for social criticism and reform. Her work demonstrated that family systems could be both preserved and improved through intelligent criticism, individual moral development, and gradual social reform that respected tradition while promoting individual happiness and social progress in ways that served both individual and collective welfare. The woman who had grown up observing the complex negotiations required for family survival in Georgian England became one of literature's most perceptive analysts of how family structures affect human development and social progress, while demonstrating that social criticism could be both effective and constructive when it combined intellectual clarity with emotional sensitivity. Her legacy reminds us that understanding family systems requires both emotional intelligence and social awareness, and that the most effective criticism of social institutions comes from people who understand them intimately enough to see both their strengths and their weaknesses, while remaining committed to both individual happiness and collective welfare. As we reach the end of our journey through these different family systems, from medieval European inheritance disputes to Powhatan diplomatic marriages to Georgian English social negotiations, perhaps we can appreciate the remarkable diversity of ways that human societies have organized family relationships while recognizing common challenges that appear in every family system regardless of cultural context or historical period. Each system we've explored tonight had its own logic, its own strengths, and its own limitations while addressing universal human needs for security, identity, belonging, and purpose that appear in every family system regardless of cultural background or social organization. Medieval families created stability and continuity across generations, but often at the cost of individual autonomy and personal fulfillment. Powhatan families developed sophisticated diplomatic protocols that allowed complex tribal alliances, but required individuals to subordinate personal preferences to political necessities. Georgian English families maintained elaborate social hierarchies that provided structure and meaning, but limited opportunities for social mobility and personal development. What all these systems shared was the recognition that family relationships are too important to be left entirely to personal preference, emotional attachment, or individual choice without consideration of collective welfare, social stability, and long-term consequences that affect multiple generations of family members and entire communities. Each culture developed elaborate protocols for managing family conflicts, allocating family resources, maintaining family unity across generations and geographic distances, and balancing individual needs against collective welfare in ways that served both personal fulfillment and social stability. Modern families often struggle with the opposite problem: too much individual freedom and too little structure for managing conflicts, maintaining long-term relationships, or coordinating family responses to crises that require collective action and mutual support rather than individual solutions. We've gained personal autonomy, romantic freedom, career choice, and geographic mobility, but sometimes at the cost of the community support, multi-generational stability, and collective security that characterized earlier family systems and provided individuals with identity, belonging, and security that modern individualism sometimes fails to provide. The stories we've explored tonight remind us that family harmony has always required work, that family loyalty has always involved sacrifice, that successful family systems balance individual needs against collective welfare in ways that change over time but never disappear entirely, and that family relationships remain among the most complex and important human achievements. Whether we're talking about medieval inheritance disputes, Powhatan diplomatic marriages, or Georgian social negotiations, the underlying challenge remains the same. How do we create family relationships that provide both personal fulfillment and collective security while adapting to changing circumstances that require flexibility, innovation, and resilience from everyone involved? The people we've met tonight, from medieval nobles managing complex extended family politics, to Pocahontas navigating cross-cultural diplomatic challenges, to Jane Austen analyzing the social systems of her era, all demonstrated that family success requires both emotional intelligence and strategic thinking, individual development and collective responsibility, and traditional wisdom combined with innovative adaptation to changing circumstances. Their examples remind us that family relationships are among the most complex and important human institutions, requiring skills that combine personal affection with political awareness, individual autonomy with collective responsibility, and emotional authenticity with strategic thinking in ways that serve both personal happiness and family welfare across generations. Family success isn't about having perfect relationships or ideal circumstances. It's about developing the skills, commitment, and wisdom necessary to maintain loving connections while managing the practical challenges that affect every family in every era, from economic pressures and social expectations to individual differences and changing circumstances that require ongoing adaptation and mutual support. So as you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you can appreciate both the challenges and the achievements of the family systems that shaped your ancestors' lives, while considering how the lessons they learned about family relationships might inform your own approach to the people you care about most. The medieval nobles who survived complex inheritance disputes, the Powhatan leaders who maintained tribal alliances across vast territories, and the Georgian families who created social stability during periods of rapid change. All of them proved that family relationships can thrive even under difficult circumstances when people are willing to invest the time, energy, and emotional intelligence required for genuine family success. Their stories remind us that family harmony isn't a natural state that occurs automatically when related people live together and share common interests. It's an achievement that requires constant effort, regular negotiation, ongoing adaptation to changing circumstances, and the wisdom to balance competing needs in ways that serve both individual happiness and collective welfare. Sweet dreams, and may you wake up tomorrow with a deeper appreciation for the family relationships that enrich your own life and a greater understanding of the historical foundations that continue to influence how families function, adapt, and thrive in our own era and in all the eras that came before us. The medieval world was politically complex. Powhatan society was diplomatically sophisticated, and Georgian England was socially elaborate. But people in all these eras found ways to create meaningful family relationships while navigating systems that were often challenging, sometimes oppressive, but always essential for human survival, individual development, and social progress. Their legacy reminds us that family success isn't about having perfect relationships or ideal circumstances. It's about developing the skills and commitment necessary to maintain loving connections while managing the practical challenges that affect every family in every era, and that the most important human achievements have always required both individual courage and collective wisdom. Good night.